I never thought my life would unravel because of a camera. Funny thing, considering I've built a career on trust. 41 years old, a craftsman in a small town like Willow Creek. My days usually revolved around wood, metal, and honest work. Nothing flashy, nothing complicated. That's the thing about small towns. Trouble travels slower, until it doesn't. For weeks, people in town had been murmuring about break-ins. A few stolen tools, a busted lock on a shed, a missing lawnmower. Enough noise that even a man like me, who normally minded his own business, started to worry. I had Ethan, my 16-year-old boy, to think about. My wife, Vanessa. Our house. Our bed. Our little world. So I did what any man would do when the whispers got too close. I installed cameras. Discreet little things, tucked into corners, meant to catch shadows moving where they shouldn't. But the camera never lies. And what it caught that night wasn't a thief in a ski mask. It was something worse. Vanessa, my wife of 19 years, and Brandon Holt. I'd always thought of him as harmless enough. A co-worker she mentioned in passing, someone from the insurance office where she'd worked for the last decade. He had one of those smiles that made people feel seen, but it never crossed my mind that he'd be seeing my wife that way. Until I saw the footage. It was grainy but clear. Their bodies tangled in our sheets, the same ones I'd lain on just the night before. Her head thrown back in a laugh I hadn't heard in years. His hand tracing the curve of her hip. The same hip I used to worship like it was holy ground. They kissed like teenagers sneaking behind a gym. All heat and hunger. The kind of urgency I hadn't felt from her in. I couldn't remember when. My stomach twisted. There it was, undeniable. The camera never lies. I wanted to look away, to slam the laptop shut, to delete the file and pretend it hadn't happened. But I watched every second, every shift of their bodies, every sound, even muffled by cheap audio. When her moan drifted through the speakers, it felt like a knife carving through my chest. That sound used to be mine. And then, footsteps on the stairs. Dad, Ethan's voice, cracking a little from the edge of boyhood into manhood. What's for dinner? Panic slammed into me harder than the footage ever could. I snapped the laptop shut, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. My son couldn't see. He couldn't know, not yet. I forced my voice steady. I'll order pizza. Pepperoni, like always. He nodded from the doorway, none the wiser, his shaggy hair falling into his eyes. Cool. I'll be in my room. I waited until I heard his door close, before I let out the breath I'd been holding. My heart was still racing, my palms slick with sweat. I had just watched my marriage end, and my son had no idea. For a long time, I sat there in the glow of the laptop, staring at the dark screen, seeing only the echo of their bodies moving where mine should have been. My head was full of noise, anger, humiliation, grief. But beneath it all, a strange, cold clarity. This wasn't ending quietly. Vanessa had crossed a line she couldn't step back from, and I wasn't about to let it slide into whispers or excuses. Not after everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed. The betrayal burned hot in my chest, but right beneath it, something else began to take shape, determination. I don't know if it was pride or survival, but in that moment I decided, if Vanessa wanted to set fire to our life, then I'd make sure everyone saw the flames. The camera never lies, and neither would I. I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the house hum like it always does at night. The refrigerator click, the water heater sigh, the faint whistle at the kitchen window where the caulk needs redoing. Ordinary sounds, but now they felt like lies. The bed still smelled like her shampoo, citrus and something warm, and every breath dragged memory across my lungs until I wanted to cough it out. I kept seeing the frames. His hand on her hip, her mouth soft and open, the way she arched when he slid down the sheets. Sex in my bed. Not nostalgia, not a mistake, practice. Familiar. At 6:12 a.m., I decided I was done being a witness. I became a participant. I called Tyler first. He answered on the second ring, with that gravel road voice he gets after closing the Rusty Nail at 2 a.m. You either need help or bail money, he said. Which is it, Jake? Option C, I said. An alibi. Silence. Then a chair scrape. The shift of a man waking up fast. Tell me. I told him the short version, the cameras for break-ins, the footage that caught something worse. I kept my voice flat so I wouldn't break, and it worked until I said her name and his in the same sentence. Vanessa and Brandon. The pairing tasted like a cracked tooth. Jesus, Tyler said low. I'm sorry. I need to be seen at your place tonight. I need receipts, eyes, maybe a picture or two. It has to look like I was there until close. You planning something that needs an alibi? I'm planning not to get blindsided. I rubbed my eyes. And I want people talking by tomorrow. That'll happen, he said. You show up and keep your cool. I'll do the rest. But Jake, no swinging. No guns. Anger makes stupid men. I'm not stupid, I said. I wanted it to be true. He exhaled. Come by at 7. I'll line up a couple regulars to remember every minute. Thanks. Hey, he added softer. You want me to come over now? No, I looked at Ethan's door. I've got a kid to feed and a day to pretend. After I hung up, I made coffee that tasted like pennies and fried eggs Ethan ate without tasting. I watched him shovel food like teenage boys do, oblivious, the way I'd been. He noticed the silence eventually, gave me a slanted look. You good? Long night, bud. I pushed a second piece of toast across the counter. You staying late for practice? Yeah. Coach wants film review. Text me if you want pizza. Always want pizza. He smirked, then sobered. You sure you're good? Go, I said, too quickly, because my hands were shaking and I didn't want him to ask why. The house felt larger when he left, like the rooms were avoiding me. I took my phone and scrolled to the Whitfields, Margaret and Charles. Old money patients, church on Sundays, a farmhouse that smelled like lemon oil and pride. They adore Ethan. They adore the idea of Vanessa. I wondered how fast love could pivot when the truth arrived with a timestamp. Margaret answered on the first ring. Jacob, is everything all right? Vanessa left early. She said she had a meeting. There it was, the lie already on the move. I need to see you and Charles tonight, I said. It's important. Her voice went maternal and careful. Is this about Vanessa? Yes. Oh, a pause, brittle as eggshell. 7:30. We'll be here. Thank you. I hesitated. I'm bringing proof. Another pause. Just air and then. We'll make coffee. I stayed busy because stillness would drown me. In the shop out back, I planed a strip of cherry until it gleamed like honey, then cut it clean and watched the offcut fall the way a life does. Perfectly straight until it isn't. The blade noise filled my head. The smell of what crowded out the citrus shampoo ghosting through the hall. By noon I had a pile of nothing and a calm that didn't feel earned. I showered, shaved, and put on the kind of shirt you wear when you need the world to take you seriously. On my way into town, I called Tyler again. Can you spark the rumor mill? I asked. I can tap the keg, he said. But you know how this works. Once it's out, it's out. You don't get to pilot the gossip plane. I just need it airborne. Copy that. And Jacob, keep the story clean. No embellishments. The truth is enough fire. He wasn't wrong. The truth could melt steel. I spent the afternoon at jobs site hopping, checking measurements I knew were right, resharpening pencils already sharp. Vanessa texted around 4, running late. Don't wait on me for dinner. Heart emoji. I stared at the red cartoon heart for a long time, a cherry drop round enough to choke on. Then typed back. No problem. Be safe. At 6:40, I parked under the sycamores lining the Whitfield's long drive and sat there until the clock ticked to 45. The farmhouse light spilled warm across the gravel. The wind smelled like hay and the river. I carried the laptop like a weapon and knocked on the door I'd entered 100 times with pies, with Ethan, with gratitude. Charles opened it. His jaw was a line, his blue eyes hard from decades of sun and work and being right about most things. Jacob. Sir. We shook hands like men still believing that counted. Margaret had put out the good cups, the ones with blue rims, the ones for births and holidays. Her hand fluttered at her throat when she saw the laptop. Let's sit, she said, and we did. And for a second I wanted to be anywhere else. A stranger in a bus station, a driftwood log dust. But I opened the computer and cued the clip. I didn't watch them watch it. I watched their faces reflect the light, disbelief stretching Margaret's mouth, the muscle in Charles's cheek jumping like a fish on a line. When Vanessa laughed on the screen, Margaret made a sound I'd heard once before, the day their old hound limped into the road and didn't limp back. When Brandon's voice came through, low, cocky, intimate, Charles's hand closed into a fist on the tablecloth. When it ended, the room felt colder. Nobody spoke. "Timestamps last night," I said. "There are more. Weeks." Margaret's eyes filled, then steadied. "My girl," she whispered, not as a defense, but as a funeral. Charles stood up because sitting wasn't enough. "Where?" "Our bed." He cursed softly, a farmer's prayer turned inside out. Then he sat, because standing wasn't enough either. "What do you mean to do?" I heard Tyler's voice in my head, no swinging, and answered like the man I used to be. "Handle it. Cleanly. I'm meeting Tyler tonight at 7 for optics. After that, I want her to tell the truth. To you. To Ethan. To this town that keeps her crowned." Margaret's fingers found mine. "We'll stand with you," she said, and I felt it, something like a scaffold raising under my feet. Charles nodded, slow and heavy. "She'll answer," he said. "To us and to God." I closed the laptop. I'd prefer she answer to me first. On the drive to the Rusty Nail, I caught my reflection in the windshield. A man who'd spent 19 years believing he was building a home, and who now understood he'd been building a stage. I pulled into the gravel lot, where truck beds caught the last smear of sun and neon bled through the windows. Inside, the familiar smell of spilled beer and fried onions wrapped around me like an old coat. Tyler met me with 2 glasses and a grip on my shoulder. "You sure?" "No," I said. "Pour anyway." He set me at a corner table in plain sight and made a show of introducing me to the 2 regulars he'd promised. "Grady, you remember Jake? He's here all night, you hear?" he said loud enough for the bar to learn it by osmosis. I sipped slow. I let people see me not raging. I paid cash in card, stacked receipts like shingles, posed for a blurry photo with a couple celebrating 5 years together, her hand on his chest, his smile easy. When the jukebox stumbled into a love song that used to be ours, I held my breath until the chorus was done, then exhaled something that felt like someone else's name. At 9:43, my phone buzzed. "Vanessa, staying at the office, late claims. Don't wait up." Another heart. I typed "good luck" and showed it to Tyler, so the alibi had witnesses. "Rage is a hot knife," he said quietly. "Use the handle." "I'm building the handle," I said. I meant it. I wanted to. But when I closed my eyes, I still saw her pale throat, the guilty bloom in her cheeks, the way she reached for him like oxygen. That was the worst of it, the part one couldn't sand down. Not just the betrayal, but the want. She had wanted him, and that made me want a reckoning she could feel in her bones. The camera never lies. Neither would I tomorrow. I'd make sure she couldn't either. They say family can either be a harbor or a hurricane. The Whitfields' farmhouse had always been a harbor. Wide porch, hymnals in the drawer, lemon cake cooling on a rack when we arrived for Sunday dinners. Tonight it felt like both, familiar and about to swallow me whole. I carried the laptop, like contraband, across their tidy living room. The house smelled of lemon oil and old prayers. Margaret smiled at me with a kind of cautious hope that I hated for being fragile. Charles met my eyes with a different look. The kind a man gives when he's deciding whether to stand with you or throw you under something heavier. I wanted him to stand. I needed him to stand. But need doesn't make loyalty. Margaret set a thermos of coffee down and reached for my hand before I'd even sat. Her fingers were smaller than I remembered, paper thin with age, but warm and steady. "Jacob, honey," she said, voice like a thread. "Whatever it is will help." I wanted to say everything at once and nothing at all. Instead, I put the laptop on the coffee table, hand steady now, because standing still felt safer than moving. I cued the footage. The blue rim of Margaret's teacup trembled beside it. They watched it first with a kind of clinical disbelief, as if the images were some documentary about another couple. Then the way the camera caught Vanessa's laugh, that sound I'd mistaken for happiness, but was really celebration, tugged at Margaret. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a single breath left like a broken prayer. No, she said, and it was the quiet denial of someone who'd just seen a ghost wearing a familiar face. Charles's jaw tightened. He was a man who'd built barns and fixed tractors. His hands had calluses from honest labor and fists that learned a different kind of work. When Brandon's arm slipped beneath Vanessa's blouse, and she leaned into him, Margaret made a noise I'd heard only once before, when her old collie didn't wake from the road. It was the sound of a small world coming apart. "This is last night?" Margaret asked, and her voice went small. The timestamp was there, clear as a date carved into wood. Last night, and the night before that. Weeks. Workday lunches stitched into midnight rendezvous. Timestamps like nails in a crate, each one cruel and precise. Charles stood up without warning. The chair scraped, a hard punctuation. "Where?" he asked, not yet looking at anyone, as though the place mattered less than the betrayal itself. "Our bed," I said. The words dropped into the room, like the first clink of dishes in a fight. Margaret's shoulders hunched, as if something had punched into her ribs. Her face went porcelain, and she folded her hands into her apron, as if to steady herself. "She's been lying," Charles said, the accusation simple and raw. "To us, to everyone. To you." "Yes," I said. The truth felt like winter air, cold, clean, immediately sharp. "And to Ethan." Margaret's tears came suddenly, the kind that don't announce themselves. They spilled down her face, falling onto the blue-rimmed cup, soaking the white porcelain like a scar. "My Vanessa," she whispered. And in that whisper there was no defense, only a grief I recognized from funerals and bad diagnoses. The moral ledger of a church-going family had been totaled in an instant. Charles's hands found the edge of the table as if the wood could steady him. "How long?" he asked, but it was a question without meaning now. The footage had already answered. Margaret looked at me through the wetness. "Why would she do this?" she asked, the question of a woman who'd raised a daughter on lessons of right and mercy. I wanted to tell her it wasn't a single why, that affairs often started with small absences, a missed dinner, a softened look that grows into a sharp hunger. I wanted to tell her it was my fault, in ways I didn't want to admit. Instead I said, "I don't know." "I raised her to," Margaret began, and then the words died. She folded into herself, rocking a little on the chair, as if the ache might be soothed by motion. "She never told me." She broke off. The sentence was the size of a confession. Charles's anger had a different shape. It was not the quiet grief of a mother, but the hot, practical fury of a man whose honor had been met with contempt. He walked to the window and stared out at the dark fields, his silhouette a straight line. "This can't stand," he said finally. "Not in our town. Not for my daughter." "You mean they'll talk?" Margaret said in a whisper that made my stomach flip. "They already will. God help us." "They'll know the truth," Charles said. "That's what matters. Vanessa needs to face the truth. She'll explain. She'll apologize. She'll—" He stopped because he didn't know what else to demand of a woman he had taught to kneel and to cough up piety when required. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, feeling small and enormous at once. Margaret's hand found mine again. "Bring her here," she said with a decision that surprised me by its clarity. "We'll talk. We'll pray. You'll be there. We are family. We won't let this be brushed into gossip." She must answer. Charles barked something that sounded more like a plan than language. "She'll tell Ethan. She'll tell the church if she must. We'll make sure she doesn't hide." Their support felt like a double-edged thing. On the one hand, it was shelter. On the other, it was a public scaffold. To have them at my side guaranteed that the truth would not be smoothed over. It meant Vanessa's betrayal would not be contained to late-night whispers. It would become a reckoning. Part of me wanted to lean into that, to let their righteous indignation make the loud voice I needed. Another part, a quieter and very human part, worried about what this would do to Ethan, to Vanessa, to the town that had known us as a unit. I pictured Ethan's face, raw and incredulous, Margaret's hands shaking as she folded laundry for a daughter she suddenly had to judge. "If you stand with me," I said, voice low, "I'll do it clean. I want her to face truth, not a show." Margaret straightened, wiped her face on the back of her wrist, and nodded. "We will not shame her beyond what is honest," she said. but she must answer. Charles looked at me, and for the first time in hours, he was almost tender. "She's your wife," he said. "She betrayed you. We'll be with you." I closed the laptop because there was nothing left to watch that they hadn't seen. The room felt heavy with things spoken and unspoken. Margaret poured another cup of coffee and slid it across with hands that trembled less than mine. Before I left, Margaret stood at the door and hugged me longer than a greeting. Her cheek rested against my temple, and for a second I tasted the lemon of her perfume and the memory of better dinners. She whispered, "We'll pray for mercy." Outside, the porch light threw our shadows long across the gravel. I drove home with the engine idling the way my mind kept looping, caught on images, on names, on the small, intimate betrayals that had the audacity to become public. When I unlocked the front door, the house was the same house and utterly unfamiliar. I knew, with a sort of cold, pragmatic certainty, that tonight we had crossed into something else. The Whitfields had chosen a side, and it was not a private choice. It meant Vanessa would have to stand in the open, for better or worse. Family could be a harbor. Tonight it felt like a lighthouse, bright, unforgiving, illuminating what had been hidden. The hardest part wasn't the lying. It was acting like everything was normal. For days I kissed Vanessa goodbye in the mornings, listened to her chatter about Brandon's brilliant ideas at work, and forced myself not to explode. But inside I was planning. The excuse came easily. One evening at dinner, I pushed my fork across the plate and sighed. "Got a call from Denver today. They need me out there for a quick job. Shouldn't be gone more than 3 nights. Her eyes lit up in a way that confirmed every suspicion I had. Too bright, too eager. She tried to mask it with a soft smile, the kind wives give when pretending to miss their husbands. "Oh, that's sudden. But of course, honey, if you have to go, you have to go." If she thought I couldn't see the sparkle of anticipation in her eyes, she was wrong. That night, while she showered, I texted Mrs. Callahan. The widow next door had been the unofficial neighborhood watchdog for 20 years. Nothing happened on Willow Creek Lane without her knowing. "Need a favor. Keep an eye on the house this weekend. Don't ask questions. Just let me know if a blackoutie shows up." Her reply came back almost instantly. "Consider it done." By Friday, my plan was in motion. I packed a small duffel bag with just enough clothes to sell the lie. I even left an open map on the workbench in the garage, a rental receipt tucked into my wallet. I wanted no gaps in the story, no reason for her to suspect I hadn't really left town. When she kissed me goodbye that morning, her lips barely grazed mine, the kind of absent-minded peck you give a stranger. My chest burned with the urge to spit the truth in her face, but I swallowed it down. Not yet. As the sun dipped low that evening, I crouched behind the thick trunk of the oak tree in our backyard, the same one where, years ago, I'd carved J plus V equals forever. Back then, she'd laughed, kissed me, and said we were the real thing. Now the carved heart mocked me. Forever had turned into until Brandon showed up at the office. I waited, muscles stiff, every sound amplified by my pounding heartbeat. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights glowing like lazy fireflies. Then, headlights swept across the lawn. Brandon's Audi rolled up the driveway, as smooth and smug as the man himself. He stepped out in a fitted blazer, carrying wine and a bouquet of lilies, Vanessa's favorite. The bastard even knew the details. My fists clenched until my knuckles cracked. The front door opened before he even reached the steps. Vanessa stood there, hair down, wearing the silk robe I'd bought her for our anniversary. She laughed, that laugh that used to belong only to me, and took the flowers as if he'd just won her the world. My stomach twisted. They kissed quickly, nervously, then slipped inside. The door shut, and the house I'd built with my bare hands swallowed them whole. For a long time, I just stood there, the night pressing down on me. My mind replayed the image of them, framed in my doorway like some obscene portrait. But beneath the sickness, something colder bloomed, determination. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theater. She thought she could script me out of my own life, write Brandon into the role of husband, and no one would ever know. But I had the footage. I had the truth. And soon, I'd have my audience. When I finally slipped back into the shadows, my pulse had steadied. The trap was set. Vanessa thought She was getting away with the perfect affair. What she didn't know was that the curtain was about to rise, and I was the one directing the play. The moment arrived with the kind of calm that makes storms jealous. I parked 2 streets over and walked the dark like it owed me rent. Margaret and Charles pulled in behind the fence, just as planned. No headlights, no chatter, just the stiff posture of people who believe in Judgment Day and have decided to show up early. "You're sure?" Charles asked, voice low enough to keep the night from gossiping. "I'm beyond sure," I said, holding up my phone. "Tonight we stop pretending." Margaret nodded once, lips tight, her eyes shining with something that wasn't tears yet, but could be if you stared too long. We cut across my yard, dew soaking our cuffs, and I felt the oak tree at my back like a hand between my shoulders, pushing. Inside, the house was dim and warm, the thermostat set high for skin, not weather. Past the foyer, down the hall where our family photos still smiled like idiots, the bedroom door was ajar. A ribbon of lamplight lay across the rug. Sounds carried, fabric, breath, the sticky half-whisper of people who think the world has shrunk to the size of a mattress. I didn't kick the door. I pushed it with 2 fingers and watched it swing open like a curtain. They were there. Of course they were. Brandon wore my robe, the slate gray one with the frayed belt I keep meaning to replace. On Vanessa's neck, a familiar glint. Her grandmother's pearls. The strand Margaret guards like a relic of a better America. The pearls moved when Vanessa moved, those little moons jumping against the hollow of her throat as she rocked her hips. Sex, present tense, without apology. My bed held their heat, like it was grateful. Everything slowed. Her hair spilled over the pillow we picked out at a Labor Day sale. His hands bracketed her waist like he owned the patent. She looked up at him with that hungry softness I used to mine for weeks at a time, the kind of look that made me believe in anniversaries. Then her gaze slid, found the doorway, and found me. The sound she made cut the air in half. Brandon jerked around, too slow to hide anything. For one stupid second he tried to clutch the robe closed. Like modesty could reverse time. Margaret gasped. A small bird shattered on glass. Charles took 1 step forward and stopped, because I raised a hand without looking. "Don't," I said, to the room, to the world, to the part of me that wanted to reduce a headboard to matchsticks. Vanessa yanked the sheet over herself, pearls startling against bare skin. "Jacob, what are you?" "Home," I said. "In my house. In our room. In my robe." I tilted my head at Brandon, whose jaw was dithering between bravado and begging. "Stand up." He didn't move. I walked in slow, deliberate, like the floor belonged to me, because it did. The cam on the dresser blinked the color of proof. I picked it up, let the silence notice it, then set it on the nightstand facing them. Charles snarled. I'd never heard the sound come from a human throat. "You," he said to Vanessa, pointing like a judge. "You're wearing your grandmother's pearls to do." He couldn't finish. Maybe he didn't know the vocabulary for how to say sex and blasphemy in the same sentence. Margaret's hands trembled at her heart. "Nessa," she whispered. Just that. A name without a daughter inside it. Brandon finally found words. "Look, man, this isn't what it looks like." He swallowed, glanced at the camera, at me, at the sheet. She said you were gone." She said. "Say less." I told him. "You've done enough talking." Vanessa was crying now. Quick slick tears that made highways down her cheeks. "Jacob, please," she said, reaching with a hand that had touched a minute old. "This is a mistake. I never meant." "Stop." My voice surprised me. It was level, almost kind. No improvisation. "We're working from the script you wrote." I set my phone on the dresser and tapped the screen. The room filled with the blue-white light of the first video. The low angle, the same bed, different night. The two of them again, less careful, more laughing, a little drunk on each other's cruelty. Brandon's chuckle floated out of the phone, like a fly you can't swat. Margaret sobbed once, a clean break. Charles's hands curled into old weapons. I swiped to another clip, then another. Week after week, a mosaic of want and convenience. The audio caught her whispering his name, and the name wasn't mine. Every timestamp landed like a nail through wood. I didn't look at the screen. I watched their faces learn themselves. Enough, Vanessa said, voice shredding. Please, Jacob, turn it off. I did. Mercy is better when it's seen. Here's how this goes, I said, pocketing the phone. You're going to tell your parents what you told him. Not later. Now. You're going to look at your mother and your father and say it with the same mouth you used to lie to me. She flinched like I'd struck her. She looked to Brandon for courage, found none. He was busy shrinking. I made a mistake, she tried, then tried to make it bigger so it could hide inside. We were unhappy. You were always working. I felt alone. Brandon listened. Margaret made a wounded sound. And this is how you fix lonely. Charles took a step toward Brandon then, old muscles remembering old orders. Get out of that robe, he said, each word its own nail. You don't wear a man's skin while you steal his life. Brandon blinked, baffled, then fumbled with the belt, letting the robe fall to the floor like a flag finally ashamed to wave. He grabbed for the sheet. Vanessa clutched it harder, pearls bobbing like a lie that can't sit still. I walked to the closet, pulled a second robe down, the heavy flannel one I wear in winter, and dropped it on the floor by his feet. You don't get that one either, I said. Find your own cover. He bent to retrieve his clothes, muttering something about calling someone, lawyers, cops. Try it, I said. You like what they say after I show them the recordings, and the calendar entries, and the text logs. Silence drew itself up like a tall man. Vanessa's voice snapped small. What do you want, Jacob? Not a challenge. A map request. Truth, I said. And distance. I turned to Margaret and Charles. I told you I'd handle it cleanly. This is clean. I faced Vanessa. Tomorrow, you'll tell Ethan. I'll be there to make sure he hears the part about choice. Her face folded in on itself. Ethan, she whispered, and finally, shame caught up. I backed toward the doorway, the room breathing again. Put your clothes on, I told them, and walk out of my house. Separately. You, I pointed at Brandon. Go first. There's something you should see. He shouldered past me, face set to neutral like he was posing for a passport photo taken in hell. I followed, the Whitfields behind me. The night smelled like wet grass and a thunderhead that hadn't made up its mind yet. When Brandon stepped onto the porch, the motion light bloomed. He looked up, looked down, and froze. Across the Audi's windshield, fat red letters dripped like fresh meat. Homewrecker. The paint ran in lines that would dry into permanence. A word sunk into glass by anger and a hand that knew how to spell. He spun, furious. What the who did? The town has opinions, I said, and good aim. He opened his mouth, then saw Charles standing in the doorway, and thought better of it. He jabbed the key fob. The car chirped, and he got in, smearing his reputation across the seat with his shoulders. As he reversed, the red words smeared the night back at him. Inside, Vanessa stood at the bottom of the stairs in that robe and those pearls, a portrait of poor decisions in soft lighting. She reached for me again, reflex more than plan. I stepped away. Leave the pearls, Margaret said, voice steady at last. It was not a plea. It was a verdict. Vanessa's fingers rose to the clasp. It clicked open with a tiny sound, like a safe deciding to be honest. She laid them on the hall table and looked smaller without them, just a woman who had mistaken attention for love. She gathered her clothes in silence and walked out, head down, passing the oak where 2 carved initials had survived a dozen winters. I watched her go until the dark folded shut behind her. The house exhaled. In the quiet afterward, even the refrigerator seemed to apologize. It's done, I said, though we all knew done is a word with chapters. Margaret touched the pearls, as if checking a pulse. Charles put a hand on my shoulder that carried the weight of a blessing and a warning. And me? I stood in the doorway of my ruin, strangely steady, the storm moving off toward someone else's horizon. The morning after the storm, Willow Creek felt different. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was the air itself. But the town seemed to hum with a tension that hadn't been there before. I hadn't even opened my shop yet, and I knew whispers were already moving faster than church bells. That's the thing about small towns. News doesn't travel, it gallops. And I was ready to give it a head start. I made my first stop at the Rusty Nail Tavern, Tyler was behind the bar, wiping down glasses like he was polishing secrets. He looked up, saw me, and raised an eyebrow. "Well," he said, "judging by the look on your face, either you won the lottery or you set something on fire." "Both," I muttered, sliding onto a stool. "But I'll take a beer before I tell you which one." Tyler poured, set the glass down, and leaned in. "You did it, didn't you? You caught her." I didn't have to answer. The look in my eyes said enough. I pulled out my phone, showed him the footage. He watched in silence, jaw tightening, until he finally let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Jacob. And with Brandon Holt of all people? Man's got a girlfriend and a lease he can't even afford." "Not anymore," I said flatly. "He's got me now. And I'm not the forgiving type." Tyler nodded slowly. "So what's the plan?" "The plan," I said, sipping my beer, "is to make sure everyone in Willow Creek knows exactly who Vanessa Whitfield really is. I don't want sympathy. I want truth. And I want her to feel it every time she walks into a grocery store." Tyler grinned, shaking his head. "You always did like building things, Jacob. Guess now you're building a bonfire." We spent an hour there, talking low, Tyler promising he'd let the right ears overhear pieces of the story. The Rusty Nail was the perfect hub. Farmers, contractors, clerks, even the sheriff dropped in most nights. A rumor seeded there grew roots fast. Next was Mrs. Callahan. She'd been on watch when Brandon's Audi slid into my driveway, and she'd seen him leave with homewrecker scrawled across his windshield. When I knocked on her door, she already had her kettle whistling. "Well, Jacob," she said, ushering me inside, "I was wondering how long it'd take you to stop by." "Sit. Tea." "No tea," I said, shaking my head. "Just truth." So I told her everything. The cameras, the footage, the trap, the confrontation. Her eyes widened, her lips tightened, and by the end she looked like she'd aged a decade. "Pearls," she whispered. "Her grandmother's pearls." While. She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Oh, honey, the church ladies are going to have a field day with this." That's what I'm counting on. By the time I left, Mrs. Callahan's blinds were twitching like wings, and I knew the town square would be buzzing by noon. Vanessa had played with fire. I was just handing out torches. When I got home, she was waiting for me. Still in the same robe, hair a mess, eyes red and swollen. She spun on me the moment I stepped through the door. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she snapped. "Do you want to ruin my life?" I laughed, sharp and humorless. "Ruin your life? Vanessa, you managed that all on your own. I'm just letting the credits roll." Her hands trembled as she pointed at me. "People are calling me Jacob. Friends, co-workers. They're saying you've been spreading lies." "Lies?" I barked. "Do you want me to hook up the projector and show them all the highlight reel? Should we have a town hall meeting? I'll bring popcorn." She went pale, lips working without words. Finally she whispered, "You're going to destroy me. You destroyed yourself the minute you brought him into our bed. Now you're just mad the mirror's too clear." Her phone buzzed on the counter. She snatched it up, cursed under her breath, and stormed out of the room. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't care. Later that night, another text buzzed on my phone. This one from Brandon. "You think you're funny. You're gonna pay for my car." I stared at the screen, chuckled, and typed back, "Funny thing, Brandon. You already paid. You just didn't know the price." I tossed the phone aside, leaned back in my chair, and let the satisfaction settle. For once, I wasn't the quiet craftsman in the background. I wasn't the man getting stepped on. I was the man pulling the strings. And in Willow Creek, the fire had only just started to spread. Telling Ethan was the part one dreaded most. Breaking furniture, breaking trust, breaking silence. I could do all that. But breaking my son's image of his mother? That was a wound I couldn't hammer straight. Still, lies rot a house from the inside. Better to cut out the mold than let it spread. I waited until Sunday evening. He'd just finished a shower, hair damp, hoodie half-zipped. He looked so much like me at 16 it hurt. Same sharp jaw. Same eyes that tried to see more than people wanted to show. "Ethan," I said, motioning him into the den. "Sit with me." He frowned, sensing the gravity in my voice, but dropped onto the couch. What's up? You're scaring me. I sat across from him, elbows on my knees. You know how people in town have been talking? About me, about your mom. His shoulders stiffened. Yeah, kids at practice said something. I told them to shut up. Don't, I said softly. Don't shut it out, because it's true. I need you to hear it from me, not from whispers. His brows drew together, suspicion sharpening into fear. What do you mean? I swallowed hard. I found out your mom's been with someone else. Not just once. For a while. I caught them in our house. The silence after those words was brutal. His face went pale, then red, then pale again, like a storm cloud flashing lightning. Who? He demanded. His voice cracked but didn't break. Who is it? I hesitated, but the truth was already half out. Brandon Holt. He shot to his feet, fists clenched. Her co-worker? That guy. The one she always defended at dinner. Yes. His voice rose, ragged. She ruined us for him. He paced the room like a caged animal, chest heaving. What the hell is wrong with her? I wanted to tell him I didn't know, that I'd asked myself the same question 1,000 times. Instead, I let him burn. Rage is honest, and I owed him honesty. I swear to God. He spat. If I ever see him. I cut in sharp. No, that's not your fight. It's mine. You don't carry my battles. His eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. She lied to me, Dad. She looked me in the eye every day, like nothing was wrong. How could she do that? I had no answer. I just shook my head. The front door creaked. Vanessa stepped inside, clutching her purse like a shield. When she saw us, Ethan flushed. Me steady, she froze. Ethan, she started, voice trembling. I can't explain. Explain, he exploded. What are you gonna say? That it wasn't real? That Dad faked it. I know the truth, Mom. I know everything. She dropped her purse, reached toward him. Sweetheart, please. Don't call me that. His shout rattled the walls. You're a liar. You lied to me, to Dad, to everyone. He shoved past her, shoulders stiff, fury radiating like heat. I'm not staying in this house with you. Ethan, she cried, stumbling after him. Wait, let me talk. But he was already grabbing his backpack from the stairs, stuffing clothes into it with wild hands. Margaret and Charles had told him he was welcome anytime. Now he was taking them up on it. I followed him to the door. Son, I'm done, he said, voice raw. I'll be at Grandma and Grandpa's. At least they don't lie. And then he was gone, slamming the door behind him, leaving Vanessa sobbing in the hallway, and me staring at the pieces of a family that used to be whole. She collapsed to her knees, face in her hands. Jacob, please. I didn't think it would come to this. I never wanted him to hate me. I looked down at her, the woman I'd once trusted with my soul. You wanted everything, Vanessa, and now you've got nothing. Her sobs echoed in the empty house, but I didn't feel pity. I felt clarity. Ethan had chosen, Margaret and Charles had chosen, even the town had chosen. She was alone in a way no apology could fix. That night, I lay in bed and listened to the silence of a house missing its heartbeat. It wasn't peaceful. The morning after Ethan left, but it was honest. I woke to a house that was more than I'd had in a long time. No laughter, no footsteps, just the brittle shuffle of a life being sorted into piles. Rage wanted a sledgehammer. I reached for a folder. If she'd burned a marriage for sex and a thrill, I'd answer with something less cinematic and more permanent, consequences. Daniel Reeves's office smelled like leather and statute books. He'd coached half the town through wills and fence-line disputes. Divorces were his winter sport. He looked me over, saw the exhaustion, and slid a legal pad across the desk. Tell me everything, he said. I did. The cameras for the supposed break-ins. The footage that caught something worse. The trap. The confrontation. Brandon in my robe. Vanessa in her grandmother's pearls. I left out nothing but the urge to break the world. Daniel didn't flinch. You recorded in your own home, he said, tapping the pad. No expectation of privacy for trespassers. Keep the raw files. No edits. We'll talk chain of custody. Colorado still cares that a spouse sleeps around? I asked dry. Or do we just call it a vibe mismatch and split the furniture? He smiled without warmth. Adultery doesn't give you damages here. But in a fault-based petition, it can shape the story. Custody arguments. Dissipation of marital assets if she used joint funds to carry on the affair. Spousal support considerations. Judges are human. They read context. You document patterns, not just one bad night. I nodded, felt the click of a plan seeding into place. Patterns I have. He leaned forward. Then preserve the metadata. Export the footage, but keep originals on 2 separate drives. Hash the files, SHA 256, and print the digests. Start a timeline, dates, times, who was where. Credit card statements, fuel receipts, text logs, call details. If she used work hours for extracurriculars, that matters to her employer. Not to the court, but to leverage. Her boss. I said, regional manager, HR, whoever's real. You don't defame. You present facts. Dates, times, policy references if you have them. His pen scrawled a list that looked like a blueprint. Screenshots of calendar events. GPS pings. Neighbor statements. Any threats from Brandon, save them. He tore the page free. Slid it to me. Hit the ground running. I'll draft the petition. Keep your temper off the record and your evidence on it. On the way home, I bought 2 encrypted solid-state drives and a printer that could spit out a forest. In the shop, sawdust and the clean lines of joinery steadied my hands. Then I went to work like a foreman on a rush order for judgment. I pulled every clip, labeled them with date and time. 202507182142113_bedroom_cam1.mov. I generated hashes and pasted the long, unfriendly strings beneath each entry in a master log. I used a free tool to extract metadata, creation times, device serial numbers, frame rate, then printed the reports and slid them into sleeves. I made a second copy of everything and locked it in the tool chest under the router table. Truth shouldn't live on just one disk. Next came the calendar. I pulled Vanessa's shared iCloud entries from the family iPad, client lunch, regional review, training webinar. The footage times overlapped those innocent little phrases with the finesse of a slap. I clipped screenshots with the system clock visible, highlighted the overlaps in red, and built a matrix nobody could mistake for coincidence. I cross-referenced gas receipts from our joint card with Brandon's Audi sightings. Mrs. Callahan texted me a tidy paragraph noting dates and times she'd seen the car glide up my drive when I was in Denver. I printed her message with the phone's timestamp banner and asked if she'd sign a simple statement. She replied with a fountain pen flourish, and I saw what I saw. Audio too. The mics I'd hidden weren't good, but they were honest. Pillow-muffled words, laughter, the breathless rhythm of people solving boredom with skin. I clipped just enough, no voyeur's reel, only what proved the affair, and saved the files with the same cold precision. In one clip, her voice clear as glass. He won't be back till Monday. In another, Brandon chuckling. We're like teenagers. The word teenagers made Bal touch my tongue. I pressed stop and wrote the timecode anyway. When I had a framework, I called Daniel again. Chain of custody log started. I said, 2 drives, hashes printed, originals untouched. Good, he said. I'll file Monday. Server at work or home? Work, I answered. She liked mixing the two. Which brought me to Claire Benson, regional manager, Vanessa's boss's boss. I didn't craft a rant. I wrote a memo like a man measuring twice. Subject: Documentation of policy violations by Vanessa Whitfield and Brandon Holt. Ms. Benson, I'm Jacob Carter, spouse of Vanessa Whitfield, claims. The attached index references dated video/audio showing Vanessa and Brandon Holt engaging in an affair during work hours and on the premises of my home while she reported herself at job-related functions. Included timestamps, calendar screenshots, and a table of work hour overlaps. I am not seeking your adjudication of my marriage. I am reporting conduct that appears to violate company policy re. Fraternization, time theft, and professional integrity. Happy to provide originals on request. Jacob Carter. I didn't attach the raw files. I sent the index, a 13-page spine with thumbnails blurred and timecodes crisp. Within 20 minutes my phone rang. "This is Claire Benson," a voice announced, all HR steel wrapped in courtesy. "I received your email. To be clear, you're alleging misconduct substantiated by video and calendar evidence." "I'm not alleging," I said. "I'm documenting. I'll bring the drives. You can hash them yourself." She was quiet a beat. "Please bring what you have tomorrow at 10. No need for Vanessa to be present." Afterward, I sat in the kitchen and let the silence look me over. Then I opened a fresh project file and started the sizzle reel. Not for the tavern, not for revenge porn garbage, but for the meeting. 90 seconds of indisputable, date-stamped context, entry, embrace, exit. Each clip preceded by a card showing the calendar item it contradicted. No nudity, no spectacle. Proof pared to the bone. While the export bar crawled, Brandon pinged my phone again. "Pay for the paint. Last warning." I screenshotted the text, saved it as exhibit_hold_threat_01.png, and filed it between Callahan_statement.pdf and card_statement_July.pdf. Every tantrum he sent me became another tile in a mosaic that ended with the judge's dry signature. At midnight, I drove the second drive to Tyler and had him lock it in the safe, where he kept the week's cash. "Chain of custody," I explained. He nodded, slid it in, logged the date, time, and my signature on a bar tab turned ledger. Back home, I stared at our wedding photo, Vanessa laughing into the wind on a hill above the river, my hand in her hair. I labeled the frame with blue tape and a Sharpie, exhibit before. It was petty and it was perfect. Sleep didn't come. Lists did. Subpoena phone records? Yes. Pull school emails to show my steady presence for Ethan? Yes. Inventory household assets before she got creative? Yes. I walked room to room with my camera, like an insurance adjuster on God's clock, calling things by their names and writing down their value. The act felt sacramental, taxonomy against chaos. At 3 a.m., the export finished. I watched the reel once, jaw tight, then closed the laptop gently. The way you lower a casket because the person inside once mattered. Tomorrow I'd carry the proof into fluorescent light and let the corporate machine do what it was built to do. Protect itself by cutting out infection. I wasn't noble. I wasn't vindictive for sport. I was a craftsman. Faced with splinters, I clamp, plane, and sand until the joint holds. She chose the fire. I was building the fire break. The day I walked into Daniel Reeves' office with that folder under my arm, I knew the war had shifted. Before, it was rage, scandal, humiliation. Now it was strategy. Clean, brutal, legal strategy. Daniel leafed through the files I'd assembled, timestamps, audio snatches of whispered promises, grainy footage of Brandon's hand on Vanessa's thigh when they thought the world was blind. His brows lifted in grim approval. "Jacob, this is airtight. If you want to burn their professional lives to ash, this will do it." "I don't just want it," I said. "I need it." And so we set the wheels in motion. Daniel explained how Colorado law favored fault-based divorce when adultery was proven. He told me judges weren't sentimental. They liked facts, timelines, undeniable evidence. I had all of it. Still, there was one more front. Claire Benson, Vanessa's regional manager. I drafted the email carefully, attaching the cleanest cuts of footage. Her and Brandon entangled on company time, Brandon slipping into our house while his work phone still buzzed on the dashboard of his Audi. I didn't lace the message with anger. I kept it professional, factual, cold. Claire didn't need my emotions. She needed liability spelled out in black and white. Her reply came within 24 hours. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Please forward the full set of materials for review. We will handle this matter internally." That was the sound of careers cracking before the fall. Vanessa called 2 days later, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Jacob, Claire saw the files. She's calling me in. You can't do this, please." I let the silence stretch. "Then, you did this. Not me." She sobbed, tried to pivot into seduction like old times, her tone softening. "Remember us, Jacob? Remember what we had?" I remembered, all right, the lies, the pearls around her neck, while Brandon touched her skin. Good luck explaining that to your boss. I hung up. The firings came swift and merciless. Brandon lost his position first, terminated for misconduct and gross violation of company policy. His girlfriend threw his clothes out onto their apartment's lawn the same day. Neighbors said they heard him begging at her locked door. Drunk, pathetic. Vanessa wasn't spared. Claire called her into the office, showed her the footage in full. Vanessa told me later she tried to argue it was harassment, tried to spin herself as a victim. But the timestamps didn't lie. She was finished. When she returned home that evening, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She looked less like the woman I'd married, and more like a ghost who hadn't realized she was already dead. They fired me, Jacob. They took everything. You gave everything away, I corrected. Big difference. That night at the Rusty Nail, the tavern was humming with talk. Tyler poured me a whiskey on the house. Brandon slouched in through the door, eyes bloodshot, hair greasy, looking like life had chewed him raw. He spotted me, stumbled over. You smug son of a bitch, he slurred, jabbing a finger in my chest. You think you've won? You're just a control freak who couldn't keep his wife satisfied. The whole tavern went quiet. I rose slowly, let him see the steadiness in my eyes. Brandon, you lost your job. You lost your girl. You lost your reputation. And you lost her. The only thing you're holding on to is cheap beer. A few men at the bar chuckled darkly. Brandon's face crumpled with humiliation. He muttered something about revenge, but Tyler was already steering him toward the door like yesterday's trash. I sat back down, lifted my glass. Justice didn't always come in courtrooms. Sometimes it came in the form of a broken man staggering into a bar, reminding everyone what happens when you covet another man's wife. And for the first time in months, the burn of whiskey felt clean. Willow Creek learns quickly and forgives slowly. By the time the leaves began to bronze along the river, the scandal had stopped being news and hardened into folklore. Brandon was the ghost people swore they'd seen at odd hours, unshaven, moving back into his parents' over the garage, a man-sized apology with no audience. Vanessa lasted 3 more Sundays at church. After the third sermon about truth and keeping covenants, subtle as a brick, she stopped showing up. 2 weeks later, she packed the trunk of a borrowed sedan and pointed it toward a cousin in Fort Collins. She waved at no one waved back. The divorce moved like a freight train once Daniel filed. Discovery affidavits, the ritual humiliation of inventorying a life, the couch where Ethan learned to crawl, the toaster we bought when we still believed bagels could fix a morning. Vanessa tried to argue for the house at first, stability, memories. But the judge measured stability by deeds, taxes, and the testimony of a 16-year-old who had watched his mother choose sex over family. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He said, "I want to live with my dad." And the courtroom took that sentence like gospel. We didn't win everything, because courts don't write fairy tales. But the order might as well have been engraved on the oak of my kitchen table. House to me. Primary custody to me. Assets divided with math rather than sentiment. No spousal support. The judge couched it in neutral language. Best interests. Equitable. But I heard the subtext. You kept the lights on. You kept your promises. You keep the roof. When it was done, I walked out into a pale winter sun with Ethan and breathed air that didn't taste like varnish or grief. He bumped his shoulder into mine, teenage nonchalant. "Proud of you," he said, then looked embarrassed by how much it meant and added, "For you know, not being a jerk about everything." I was a jerk about some things, I said, smiling. I just picked my spots. We stopped at the diner and ate pancakes at 3 in the afternoon, because we could. He drowned his in syrup, eyes half closed with that simple pleasure kids forget they're allowed to have when the adults start breaking each other. We didn't talk about Vanessa. We didn't have to. There's a language fathers and sons learn when they sand a board together. Measure twice. Cut once. Don't stick your hand where the blade lives. We were speaking that language again. At home, the quiet felt different. Less like the aftermath of an explosion, and more like a room you haven't furnished yet. I started small. I painted the bedroom a color that wasn't we, and took down the framed photo from the hill above the river. I put it in a box labeled archive, not trash. Not all burn piles are righteous. Some things you bury because you once loved them, and you're still the kind of man who knows the value of a decent burial. The town adjusted around us. Mrs. Callahan began sending over pies, as if sugar were a structural material. Tyler slipped me odd jobs when the shop was slow and refused to take full pay for his help installing a new pane in the door Brandon cracked when he shoved it last summer, drunk on a feeling he mistook for courage. The sheriff swung by one evening under the pretext of admiring the workbench. We both knew he was really checking that I wasn't about to go hunting for what was already dead. I showed him the drawers I'd recut to close flush. He whistled low and said, "Clean," which felt like a benediction. Vanessa called twice in the first month. The first call was all apology varnished with nostalgia. "We were good once, remember the lake?" I remembered the lake and the pearls and chose silence. The second was logistics, mail, a box of winter clothes she'd left, something about a 1099. I kept my answers clipped and kind. Kindness isn't the same as permission. It's just proof to yourself that you survived with your manners. Some nights, loneliness came like weather off the river, cool, then colder. I would walk the house and feel the echo of how we used to fit together, or laugh in the hallway, the warm press of a body sliding into mine after a long day, the kind of sex that feels like a conversation with the lights off. Memory's cruel gift is how precisely it measures what's gone. On those nights, I learned not to bargain with ghosts. I made tea. I sharpened chisels. I let the steady rasp of steel on stone remind me that edges are made, not born. Ethan found his own rituals. He started lifting after school in the garage, the old boombox coughing out classic rock, and whatever moody playlists 16-year-olds hide behind. Some evenings he'd wander into the shop and stand beside me, watching shavings curl off a plane like apple peels. He asked for help with a history paper on due process and grinned when I told him judges are just carpenters for fights. They square things. He told me about a girl named Lila in chemistry who smelled like coconut shampoo. I didn't pry, but I remembered first crushes and said the only useful thing a father can say: be harmless, be honest, be brave. On Saturdays, we rebuilt the deck. It was half rotted where the rain had pooled for years, a slow sabotage I'd ignored while thinking marriage could be caulked. We ripped boards, sister joists, set new footings in concrete that stubbornly refused to mix without clumps. Work like that asks for a whole body. It gives back a tiredness that's clean. By dusk, we'd sit on the steps, eat greasy burgers and butcher paper, and watch the sky bruise from gold to purple. If a neighbor waved, we waved back. If someone looked too long, we let them. You can't stop a stare, but you can starve it. Word drifted about Brandon, odd jobs, weekend labor, a rumor he tried to apologize to me through Tyler, and then chickened out. I didn't need his apology. He wasn't the first man to confuse opportunity with permission, but he was the one who taught me not to leave the door cracked just because I wanted to believe in a breeze. If I saw him at the gas station, I paid and left. Not every lesson requires a lecture. Spring crept in. The oak out back, J plus V equals forever still pale in its bark, pushed a fuzz of green that made the old carving look smaller, a childish boast swallowed by the tree's patient muscle. One warm afternoon, I sanded the initials down with a block, gentle as you'd smooth a splinter out of a kid's palm. I didn't erase us. Trees remember deeper than surface. I just decided to stop cutting my hand on it every time I walked by. When the decree arrived by mail, final, stamped, bland as a receipt, I set it beside the coffee maker and stared until the letters turned into a pattern. I half expected trumpets or nausea. What I felt instead was space, the kind you notice when a big piece of furniture is hauled away and suddenly the light falls differently. I took a photo of the paper and texted it to Ethan at practice. Done. He sent back a single thumb, then a second message a minute later, love you. I stood there grinning like a fool at a kitchen nobody else was in. That night, I cleaned the bedroom like a rite. New sheets, new duvet, a window open to the river's wet breath. I slept in the middle for the first time in years, a small, ridiculous victory. The dreams came anyway, Vanessa's bare shoulder in lamplight, the way desire makes sinners of people who still say grace. I woke before dawn, heart drumming, and let the feeling pass through like weather again. Wanting is not a criminal act. Lying is. In the shop, I started on a bed frame I'd been sketching since the first camera blinked awake. A platform in black walnut, quiet lines, joinery so tight you'd swear it grew that way. It wasn't for a client. It wasn't for sale. It was for the future, some unnamed room where I'd carry it with careful hands and set it down without apology. I worked the boards until my palms knew every grain by name. When the last coat of oil flashed and sank, the wood glowed like something that had survived fire and learned to love sunlight anyway. On a Sunday evening, Ethan grilled for the first time. Char too heavy, burgers a little hockey puck, but he stood there proud, spatula cocked like a salute. We ate on the new deck, feet bare, music low. He asked if I was happy. I thought about how that word used to feel like a door someone else held open or shut. I'm building happy, I said, board by board. Later alone, I walked to the oak and touched the faint scar where our initials had been. The river kept talking its old language. The town settled into its small, decent rhythms, and the house we kept, we, meaning the boy and me, held. Betrayal had carved its tunnel through us. Truth, stubborn as root, grew back. I used to think justice and freedom were destinations, bright pins in a map. Turns out they're tools, like a square and a blade. You pick them up every morning. You check your lines. You cut what doesn't belong. And if you're careful, if you're honest, what you're making starts to look like a life again.